The conversation today, we want to have a focus on the future of MACN's Nigeria project, strengthening the compliance function. We have joining us Mr. Vivek Menon through a video call. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you, Faith. It's good to be back, and looking forward to the conversation.
To start off this conversation, since 2022, the MACN has hosted leading representatives in the Nigerian maritime industry from the public and private sector to discuss next steps in the fight against corruption. And top of that agenda was the creation of the compliance framework for respective agencies covering all major ports in the country. We would like for you to tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, thank you. A very important question. And also it's very timely looking at where MACN is today, together with its local partners, CBI, the Convention of Business Integrity, and the work we have been doing where the Nigerian government has been playing an important or a key role. It also started with, just to give the listeners a bit of a background, over these many years, but also more recently from 2022, with the various events that we've been hosting, trying to bring more broadly the public sector and the private sector in the same space. So trying to expand the public-private partnership. What we have also realized is that by doing this, we are able to further, broadly speaking, port users in the sense anyone who is working in the seaports of Nigeria, whether it's Lagos or Port Harcourt or Calabar, wherever that may be. So many of them have been given the opportunity to increase their awareness in what are the standard operating procedures that the Nigerian government has, Nigeria Port Process Manual. In short, it's called the NPPM. And then around which there is also what they call the grievance reporting mechanism, which is where the Nigeria Shippers Council hosts this platform called the Port Service Support Portal, PSPP. With this in place, it was very important for us to bring both audiences together and raise awareness. So these engagements with public-private engagement, we were able to increase that. But what we also saw is more and more port users are able to demand for adherence to these standard operating procedures. Mm-hmm. And if it's not met, then they go and use the reporting channel that is presented by the government, which is the PSPP.
The establishment of the PSTT is widely acknowledged as one of the most important compliance initiatives in the fight against corruption right now in Nigeria, and the main reason behind the decreasing number of reported corruption incidents that we have. With this in mind, what more do you think that the PSTT can do to deepen the compliance function in the industry, particularly in the eastern ports, especially now that the PSTT is being gazetted?
Yeah, another important question, and especially to give the listeners a background, the PSTT is a function that was established by the Presidential Office. And what they are basically doing is to ensure the effectiveness of the Nigeria Port Process Manual. Which also means that with the work we are doing there, we've been engaging the key agencies of the PSTT, which is, of course, ICPC, the Nigeria Shippers Council, the Nigeria Port Authority, and also the Department of State Services, the DSS. And what that in principle means is that there's a very high level buy-in and support from these well-established designated compliance teams, but also what it means is that they are able to create compliance functions or compliance officers, so as to speak, in the various agencies that are operating in ports. You can say customs, immigration, mm-hmm. The drug and law enforcement, as it's called, NDLEA. All these agencies are able to set up their own compliance functions. What it also means is that it kind of alleviates the job of a agency, which is the PSTT. Instead of PSTT going and policing all the other agencies, they can do it themselves, so as to speak. So this work that started off with what PSTT is doing in adhering to NPPM each agency can then go on to do that themselves. So that is where we try to build in this compliance framework. And then going forward, it is, I mean, Nigeria is a large country. There are many, many ports and terminals in the country. So this work that has started, which has been focused on primarily Lagos, both Tinkan and Apapa, it should further go down to the eastern ports and also in other terminals that Nigeria provides. I mean, it exports energy and also imports various goods from the global market. So what we see is the mandate of PSTT combined with the compliance functions and the compliance officers that we are trying to set up together with the government of Nigeria. We are able to expand this work across the Nigerian seaports, thereby making them more effective and also adhering to the government mandate, which is coming from the Port Process Manual.
We've had a couple of discussion around the PSTT, and one of the things that keeps coming up is a question of should the PSTT be made permanent, or are they just a step in the right direction?
I think that definitely it is a model that was set up by the Nigerian government. I think we're very grateful for the work and the idea that they put this through. So it is a step in the right direction. It gives what we call an accountability framework for the ports and terminals. It's very important to have that in place. And especially, it is also ensuring that the processes that is laid down by the government, by the respective agencies. I mean, customs have a clear process in place that is laid down by themselves. Immigration have done that. So how do you ensure accountability when some processes don't go as it's supposed to? Therefore, the PSTT is definitely an entity that is very welcome by the industry. And I also believe that this will further strengthen the capacity of the Nigeria seaports overall.
The anti-corruption strategy in Nigeria has primarily focused on sanctioning those implicated in corrupt practices, which has given us the results we have so far right now in the country. So what do you think Nigeria should be looking at as next steps to create and maintain a new culture of compliance, which is very key?
Again, an important question. So there's always a debate whether what is more effective, sanctions or incentives. I mean, and in some ways, one may argue that it works. It works in favor in both. It works in tandem in some way. As
Carrot
much as
and
sanctions,
sticks.
yes, the carrot and stick approach. So we have seen that the government has taken some very clear steps on individuals who have not chosen to do the right thing. And this, of course, implies to both parties, public sector and private sector. We should be very clear in that aspect. So what we've also seen that with the work we are doing, there is a growing local private sector sensitization on the work that the government is doing. And at the same time, on the public sector, there's a broad sensitization happening. Where I'm going with that is, as we are progressing in one side where we show that clear action is being taken for people who don't do the right thing, we also need to provide an incentive mechanism to actually encourage people who are doing the right thing in their daily work. Because then you would collect, the way I'm looking at it is you would probably collect more ambassadors, so as to call, to champion this work. We already see that in the government of Nigeria today, but also in the private sector, that there are these champions who want to take this all the way. They will not stop, and they will take this whatever comes in front of them. And in addition to that, what we are already doing is to build capacity or build capability in, again, going back to this compliance function and what is compliance function and leadership in this space. So this is where, together with the government of Nigeria, we have partnered with TUGAR, an important body in the government of Nigeria, where we are doing workshops to kind of foster this capability building, or call it capacity building, of these compliance functions, and then to give them some tailored training so they can then disseminate to their rank and file in their respective organizations. So we recently conducted one in February, and where we were able to train 14 senior officials from the various agencies. And we are talking about the Ministry of Transport, NDLEA, ICPC, NIMASA, Nigeria Port Health Services. So all these various agencies came together and they wanted to understand how we can decimate this across their respective agencies. And that we believe is a very powerful tool, because you're not only just sanctioning people, but you're giving them methods of incentivizing what is the right thing to do. And if you do the right thing, there are certain carrots that you can get.
I was going to say what your thought was, after interacting with us as a people, which you think would bring more results, the carrot or the stick?
Looking at where Nigeria is going, young population, and also what the young minds are looking for is how can we do better on a daily basis? And I think they need the anchor, as I call it, someone to look up to.
Yeah.
And these senior public officials, or in the private sector, senior private sector individuals, can be their anchor, can show them that there is a choice to do the right thing. And if you do the right thing, there is progress, which we have seen in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
I think the young people will follow. So I think this is my personal opinion, and I've seen this having been in Nigeria many times, and also learning from what the young generation wants, not just in Nigeria, but globally.
Very important. Can you maybe just tell us what Nigeria risks if she fails to sustain the impressive fight against corruption in the maritime sector, which we've witnessed over the last decade? I mean, from inflation to employment, FDIs.
Yeah, very good question. And there are many parts to this, I think. And if I just look at the FDI index, or how it's called, just looking at recent indexes, I think Nigeria has increased its FDI by, I think, almost $700 million in the last 2022 quarter. And when I look at that, the foreign direct investment that's coming to Nigeria, and if I were to play with the idea where the terminals and port sector have taken the transparency conversation, one may argue, I may be completely wrong, that there is some kind of correlation. You have seen a constant increase in FDI in Nigeria. Yes, there's been a dip in the second quarter of 2022, but third quarter has also been a positive. Mm-hmm. I want to believe that there is some reference that we need to draw from this. So just looking at FDI, I think you asked specific questions. If I just look at that number, and if I then correlate to the work that the Nigerian government has been doing, last 10 years, I think we've been engaging the government of Nigeria for the last 10 years, since 2012. There is clear signs to say that there is opportunity for improvement through transparent trade, through transparent port processes. That is one aspect. The second, so I think there's a risk there. If you don't continue to pursue the transparency agenda, there is a risk, is what I'm trying to say, because there is evidence to show that you are doing well. That's one. At least that's what I read. I'm not the expert in this, I must admit, but when I read it in the way I see it. The second thing, again, I'm going back to the young population. The human capital discussion is very, very important. Yeah. We want people to thrive in their local places where they come from, and I think the ports and terminals industry, or shipping as an industry, provides a huge opportunity for Nigeria, not just in the trade and logistics sector. If you look at the maritime strategy for Nigeria, I want to see if there is one that we can speak to more broadly. Young people coming to finding jobs. Shipping, in my opinion, I've been sailing for many years. I've been in this industry for 25 years. I believe there's an ocean of opportunities for anyone who wants to pursue the career in shipping, whether it's law, whether it's economics, whether it's port operations. So I think Nigeria, again, provides a perfect incubator, you could say, for anyone in Nigeria who wants to pursue that. And there is a huge human capital that is a growing human capital that can be tapped. And then if you look at the socio-economical development, which is tied into how ports, again, for Nigeria and many countries in the coastal region, ports and terminals are what I call the bloodline of their economy, their regional economy, because Nigeria also provides energy security and food security for the hinterland countries, and then globally as well. So what I'm also trying to say here is that we should not lose the ball on the transparency agenda. We should not lose the ball on the ethics agenda, because this is possible. We have shown, or the government of Nigeria has shown, that this is achievable.
Yeah.
It is equally important that we continue to pursue higher standards going forward, because it's quite evident that there are risks, but I'm also an optimist. I believe that progress is happening in, you need to look for progress. And I think that's why Nigeria is a clear, important player on this space.
Before we let you go, tell us what's next for the MACN project in Nigeria. I mean, are there any plans to, take the success and the lessons learned in Nigeria and expand it in Africa and beyond?
I wish there was a very short answer to this, but I'll quickly give you what we did.
We'll take the long answer.
Okay. So in Nigeria, when we started, I think it was very important for us to define what the challenge was. And we were very fortunate that the government of Nigeria helped us do that. We focused that on the ports and terminal sector. We didn't, we need to be mindful that it has to be a sector-driven approach as well. So we looked at how to define the problem. We did the corruption risk assessment, and then we went on to how do we prevent this. There were elements of training people. We had to train people to understand what the standard operating procedures are and how do you report and so on. So we went through that whole exercise of what we call the prevention model. In that prevention process, we were able to detect or identify where are the lacunas or the gaps in whether it's legislation, more training, incentivizing, as you said, or sanctions. What was needed was something that we really fleshed out. And once you detect something, you need to respond to that. And this is where we talked about the compliance training, ethical champions, all those were laid down. And now we are, of course, trying to evaluate that to see, if it can go back into a cyclical format. This has really shown us that in a country like Nigeria, it works.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we, so the next step is, can we replicate this? And in our opinion, the answer is yes.
Okay.
We've already been doing that in India, in Egypt, and in Ukraine. And of course, it is not as, should I use the word, not as mature as in Nigeria is today, because in Nigeria, we actually have not just a government handshake. Government actually works in tandem with MACN and its local partners, but also supporting private sector more real time. So this is the success that we have seen, which we have already started working in other countries. And more importantly, to your direct question, what we are planning to do is to expand this from a regional context as well. Because we see there's a lot of appetite in the regional countries, West and Central Africa, to start with. So what MACN is working on to see is how can we showcase good practices, or how can we showcase what works in one country, and then the regional countries or partners could look at it and say, well, we could adapt this ourselves, or we could say there is a model that could work for us as well. And they already have all the components in place. It's a matter of fine-tuning it to their perspective. Because I want to be very clear on two things. One, every country has challenges which is unique to their location. But that also means that we cannot have one solution that fits all.
I know I said that was the last question, but I think I want to throw this in. So there's this thing that happens whenever, there's going to be a government change. People are concerned, will the policies continue, or will the agreements continue? And it has brought the discussion that should some of these, like you phrased it, it's not just government handshake, they actually are working in tandem, with in that sector. Should some of these things be made policies so that regardless of government change, it doesn't affect the results that we're seeing?
Again, a very, very important question. And this is the work that we have been doing with the government to see how we can institutionalize the work that the government has put in place for so many years. I mean, it is a lot of effort. It's a lot of people who putting a lot of time and effort in improving these standards, setting up standards and constantly reviewing them and creating accountability frameworks. So what we have seen also recently, just to also let our listeners know that in our work, we were all constantly trying to see how we can have these business roundtables, building public-private partnerships. It is also a long process to keep doing those, and then you could ask the question, well, will something materialize in the end, or you continue to have these roundtable events?
Yeah.
What we see now is that the government has introduced legislation which has codified the presidential directive on ease of doing business, which is essentially around producing strong, sustainable outcomes. And if you look at that from a port and terminal perspective, the PSTT, so as to speak, it is a gazetted system now. Or you could say that the compliance framework argument is being embedded more and more into the respective agencies, which I think will, in my opinion, will remain irrespective of a shift of
Government.
leadership.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think, again, Nigeria has shown that there is a model that has been working for us, which we want to pursue. And then maybe we can kind of institutionalize it, which they have shown as well is possible. And they have gone ahead and do it. So I'm very, again, optimistic to see that. I want to believe that any leadership that comes in the future of Nigeria will probably be able to embrace this and see this as a as an incentive to do better, and incentive to learn from how we can continue to do better going forward.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, one more thing I'm going to throw in there. We want a scorecard. So if you were to give Nigeria a scorecard, with a high result of 100%, what would the scorecard be right now for Nigeria?
Okay. And I will be very objective here. So it's also something that we have been working on. So it is being independently vetted by academic institutions that we're working together with. And Nigeria has shown a very high level of transparency. I would give it a 70% to 80% in terms of operations. And why I give 70 to 80% is because it has changed over a period of time. Over a period of time, it has achieved that. And then in terms of actually ensuring that transparency is met consistently. One thing is to make things transparent. But if it's one day transparency, another day opaqueness, that also doesn't help. So there must be some level of consistency.
Yeah.
Also, we see that there is, I would say, 60 to 70% of consistency. And which also means that there is work to be done. It's not that we have completed our work. I mean, the government also is pursuing their role in this. So, what we've also seen with the work we've been doing is regionally, they also stand out. I mean, Nigeria really stands out as an example. This data is something we have shared with ICPC, for example, and also the other institutions in the government, to see how they could use this potentially as a public reform, or how they can encourage reform going forward in the sector of ports and terminals. Because it is good to understand where you are, because there's an old saying that if you can't measure, you don't know where to improve. So if you're able to showcase this in an objective way, and in a more factual way, not how I feel that this country is doing or another country is doing. I think feeling based could be very subjective, but if you objectively demonstrate data that shows clear progress, that is important. And therefore, I gave you those numbers earlier. We see that it is also independently being measured by, we have a school of academic team as well. And also recently, we've been working very closely with the Anti-Corruption Academy of Nigeria, who's also very interested to understand how this can become a story of its own, because it's important to address this sectorally in any country.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. It's been an honor having you on this platform. Thank you so much for making the time out to discuss with us. And as always, we hope that we can call on you sometime again in the future for further discussions.
No, absolutely, Faith. It's always a pleasure to be back. So the pleasure and honor is mine for you to have me here. And yeah, it's always good to interact with you, and also hopefully the listeners find this conversation useful.
The maritime sector is important to Nigeria's economic survival, yet is riddled with lots of challenges and complications.
Where you have an efficient and effective port, volume of trade goes up.
That is the impact that shipping really creates today. It has been, and it still does.
Join us on All Things Maritime here on Integrity Radio as we discuss the way forward to improving the efficiency and transparency of the Nigerian maritime sector every Thursday at 12 p.m. on soundcloud.com/integrity-radio. With your host, Faith Onyebujo.